The theater lights dimmed slightly as the next contestant's name echoed through the vast auditorium. From behind the curtain, a slim Filipino teenager took a slow breath, clutching the microphone with both hands as if it were the only solid thing in a room suddenly too big for him. He could hear the muffled sound of the audience, people talking, shifting in their seats, waiting to be impressed or bored. His heart beat fast, not from fear alone, but from the weight of a dream he had carried quietly for years. He stepped onto the stage, and the brightness of the lights made it hard to see faces. All he could make out were shapes: the judge's desk, the glowing logo behind him, the endless rows of seats fading into darkness. His clothes were simple, almost modest, and his posture gave him away. This was not someone used to attention. When Simon Cowell glanced down at his notes and then back up at the boy, his expression showed polite curiosity mixed with doubt. He had seen thousands of singers like this before. The host asked a few routine questions. "Where are you from? How old are you?" The boy answered softly, his accent gentle, his voice barely carrying beyond the front rows. When asked why he came to audition, he paused for a moment, then said he wanted to make his family proud and show that dreams from small places could reach big stages. A few people in the audience smiled, touched but unconvinced. Then came the question that shifted the air in the room. "What are you going to sing today?" Simon asked, leaning back slightly, already preparing himself for disappointment. The boy swallowed, tightened his grip on the microphone, and replied, "An Elvis song." A ripple of reaction spread through the audience. Some chuckled softly. Elvis was a bold choice, dangerous, even. Too many had tried and failed, turning legends into weak imitations. Simon raised an eyebrow. "Elvis," he repeated, his tone careful. The boy nodded, eyes steady now. There was something different in that nod, not arrogance, but quiet certainty. He had sung this song 100 times alone, in small rooms, in moments when no one was listening. This stage was terrifying, but the song felt like home. The music began slowly, a familiar introduction filling the theater. For a split second, the audience braced themselves. Then the boy opened his mouth, and time seemed to pause. The first note was smooth, deep, and unexpectedly controlled. It didn't sound like a teenager trying to copy Elvis. It sounded like someone who understood the emotion behind the music. A hush fell over the room. Conversations stopped. Phones lowered. Simon's posture changed almost instantly, his skepticism replaced by focus. The voice carried warmth and strength, sliding effortlessly between notes. There was no strain, no rush. Each word felt intentional, as if the singer was speaking directly to every person listening. The boy stood still, not trying to impress with movement or drama. He didn't need to. His voice filled the space on its own, rich with feeling, carrying both nostalgia and something new. The audience leaned in, pulled closer by a sound that felt familiar yet surprising. It was Elvis, but reborn through a different life, a different story. By the time he reached the end of the first lines, the reaction was unmistakable. Eyes widened, mouths parted in disbelief. The judges exchanged quick glances, silently acknowledging that something special was happening. The shy teenager who had walked onto the stage moments earlier was gone. In his place stood a performer who belonged exactly where he was. And as the song continued to rise, it became clear that this was no ordinary audition. This was the beginning of a moment people would remember long after the lights faded. As the song moved beyond its opening lines, the energy in the theater shifted from surprise to awe. The boy's voice grew fuller, carrying a quiet confidence that hadn't been there when he first walked on stage. He closed his eyes for a moment, not to hide from the crowd, but to sink deeper into the music. Every note felt deliberate, shaped by emotion rather than effort. He wasn't chasing applause. He was telling a story the only way he knew how, through sound. Simon leaned forward in his chair, elbows resting on the desk, his face no longer guarded. The skeptical smile he often wore during auditions had vanished, replaced by intense concentration. He watched the boy closely, as if trying to understand how such a powerful voice could come from someone so young and unassuming. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a trick. This was raw ability meeting the right moment. The other judges felt it too. One of them slowly shook their head, eyes wide, while another pressed a hand to their chest, reacting not as a critic but as a listener moved by something genuine. They had heard countless strong singers, but this felt different. There was restraint in the performance, a maturity that suggested the boy understood silence as much as sound. He knew when to pull back and when to let the note soar. The audience responded without realizing it. People leaned forward in their seats. Some held their breath during sustained notes, afraid that even breathing might break the spell. A few quietly wiped their eyes, surprised by emotion they hadn't expected to feel. Phones that had been raised to record now stayed perfectly still, as if the moment demanded respect rather than distraction. As the melody climbed, the boy's voice didn't falter. Instead, it opened up, rich and steady, filling every corner of the theater. He didn't oversing. He trusted the song. Each lyric carried weight, shaped by longing and hope, as though he had lived the emotions far longer than his years suggested. The echo of his voice lingered after each phrase, wrapping the room in warmth. Simon glanced briefly at the other judges, then back at the stage. His expression said everything. This was not what he had expected when the boy mentioned Elvis. This was not imitation. This was interpretation. The spirit of the music was there, but the voice belonged entirely to the teenager standing under the lights. When the boy reached a particularly challenging note, the audience collectively held its breath. He sustained it with control and ease, letting it bloom rather than forcing it. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd, followed by scattered applause that quickly died down, not because people weren't impressed, but because they didn't want to interrupt. The judge's desk was completely still now. No whispers, no jokes, just focus. This was the kind of audition that reminded them why they sat there season after season, waiting for a moment that cut through routine and cynicism. The boy had unknowingly given them that moment. As the song approached its end, emotion crept into his voice, subtle but undeniable. It wasn't sadness or joy alone, but something deeper, a quiet gratitude, perhaps, or the release of a dream finally given space to breathe. His hands trembled slightly around the microphone, not from fear anymore, but from feeling. The final note rang out, clear and resonant, hanging in the air longer than expected. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the theater erupted. Applause surged to its feet, loud and overwhelming, crashing over the boy like a wave. He opened his eyes, startled, as if waking from a dream he hadn't realized he was still inside. On stage, under the roaring lights and thunderous cheers, the shy teenager stood frozen, realizing that something had changed, and that the world had just heard him for the first time. The applause didn't fade quickly. It rolled on, growing louder, fuller, until it felt less like clapping and more like recognition. The boy stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes wide as he tried to process what was happening. Moments ago, he had been a nervous teenager hoping not to embarrass himself. Now, thousands of people were on their feet, cheering as if they had witnessed something rare. His hands shook as he lowered the microphone, and he gave a small, instinctive bow, unsure of what else to do. Simon Cowell was the first to speak, but even before words came, his reaction said enough. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, then shook his head with a half-smile that carried genuine disbelief. He looked down the judge's table, as if silently asking the others, "Did you hear what I just heard?" Then he turned back to the boy, eyes sharp but warm. "I did not expect that," he said honestly. "At all." The audience laughed softly, not in mockery, but in agreement. Another judge leaned forward, voice thick with emotion, praising the control and depth of the performance. They spoke about how difficult it was to sing a song so well-known without turning it into a copy, and how the boy had somehow made it feel personal. One judge admitted they had goosebumps before the first chorus even finished. Each comment seemed to make the boy shrink a little more, overwhelmed by praise he had never imagined receiving on such a stage. Simon raised a hand gently, signaling he wanted to add something more. The room quieted. "You know," he said, choosing his words carefully, "people come on this stage every day with big dreams. Most of them want to be famous. But you," he paused, studying the boy's face. "You sound like someone who just loves music. And that's why this worked." The crowd erupted again, louder than before. The boy nodded slowly, blinking hard as emotion threatened to spill over. He thought of his family back home, of nights spent singing quietly so as not to disturb neighbors, of doubts he had carried silently for years. Standing there now, he felt seen, not just heard. When asked how he felt, he struggled to speak, managing only a soft, "Thank you," his voice breaking slightly. The audience responded with supportive cheers, urging him on. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Simon leaned toward the microphone, a familiar serious expression settling on his face. He reminded the boy that opportunities like this didn't come often, and that what he had just done was special. "You have a voice people remember," he said. "And that's incredibly rare." With a small nod, he cast his vote. Yes. The other judges followed, one by one, each vote met with louder applause. By the final yes, the result was clear. The boy had made it through, but the achievement felt bigger than a simple vote. This wasn't just about advancing to the next round. It was about validation, proof that his voice mattered beyond the walls of his own room. As confetti cannons prepared backstage and the lights softened, the boy covered his face for a brief moment, overwhelmed. When he looked up again, he was smiling through tears, a smile filled with disbelief and quiet pride. He thanked the judges again, then turned to the audience, placing a hand over his heart in gratitude. Walking off the stage, he felt different. Not famous, not finished, just changed. He had stepped into the spotlight as an unknown teenager and walked away knowing that his voice had power, the kind that crosses borders, generations, and expectations. Somewhere behind him, the judges were still talking about what they had just witnessed. Somewhere ahead, a future he had barely dared to imagine was beginning to take shape. And for the first time, he believed it was real.